I'm Steve Doubt, and I want to tell you a story called The Judge's House. It was written by Brahm Stoker in 1891, and this is my version. Stoker was born in Ireland and became the business manager of the Lyceum Theatre in London, England. He's best known for his novel Dracula. And in that novel, he associates rats with vampires and a horrible living death. This association was not wholly his invention, but a clever way to build people's dreads based on associations and beliefs that they already had. Rats will eat anything they can, but they choose the best food first and only eat the rotten food when the good food is gone. And so in ancient Egypt, when rats would steal and eat their food, they saw that, and so rats were seen as creatures of destruction, but also with good taste. People thought the bubonic plague, or the Black Death, that swept through Asia in the 14th century was caused by rats. Actually, it's caused by the fleas that infest the rats, but the belief that it's caused by rats persists to this day. Rats were considered bad luck on ships, as the lore is that rats will leave the ship when they know that something's going to happen. It's as if people believe that rats have some kind of prescience. They know when things are going to happen, and it's because of the belief that rats contain the soul of the dead, because after all, they eat dead flesh and thereby consume the souls. In fact, the practice of myomancy, diviners read omens from the behavior of rats and mice. Rats have good taste, except for that little thing about eating human flesh, of course. Another association in the story is the idea of a living evil associated with a painting. It seems to be a popular theme at the time, as Oscar Wilde's story, The Picture of Dorian Gray, was first published in 1890 and then republished in book form in 1891, which was exactly the same year that Stoker's story was published. The theme is echoed today with the living portraits of the Harry Potter series. Art is often associated with religion and mysticism. The first cave paintings from France mainly are of animals, but they also have imagery thought to depict trance-induced visions. Many traditions around the world speak of creation myths, connecting the art of creativity with the physical fate of the world. In many religious traditions, God commands us to destroy idols because they're intrinsically evil. Demons and evil spirits have existed in folklore throughout the entire sweep of history in virtually every tradition and nation. The demons often inhabit inanimate objects, and mirrors are often depicted in folklore as vehicles for the evil in the human soul. Stand in front of a mirror if you dare and say Bloody Mary 3 times. So a portrait, an idol of an evil man, can mirror the darkness in his soul, releasing it into the world. I'm Steve Doubt, and this is my version of The Judge's House by Brahm Stoker. Malcolm Malkeson was a student at the university and studying higher mathematics, and he knew with finals coming up that he had to get away from campus to study. He packed a bag full of books and another full of clothes, and he went down to the local train station, looked on the schedule, picked the first place that he didn't know about, and he bought a ticket. And so 3 hours later, he emerged in the small town of Benchurch. He took a room in the local inn, and it wasn't secluded enough for him. And so the next morning, he went out and walked around the town and the countryside to try and find a place. And he did find the perfect place. It was a huge old place, looked to be abandoned. It was built in the Jacobean style, very ornate and heavy. Tall windows all the way around with gables. And there was a huge fence, a stone fence, tall, that went all the way around the building. It looked more like a prison than a house. Well, he inquired in town and found that it was indeed abandoned. There was a family there that had all died one night mysteriously, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with the place. So he went to the local store and he got some provisions. When he ordered them, he gave the address to the proprietor, one Mrs. Dempster, and she said, "Oh no, young sir, you don't want to go there. That's the judge's house. It's an evil place full of bogies." "Bogies, Mrs. Dempster?" "Yes, ghoulies and ghosties, rats. Rats is bogies, bogies is rats." "Well, Mrs. Dempster, I will be studying mathematical functions and formulas. I have no time for that." Well, later on, as he was cleaning up, Mrs. Dempster herself came with a couple of workmen. They were there to help him move and to clean things up. He said, "I have decided that I want to stay in the great room here." It was a huge room. There was enough room for a cot, a bed, and a little kitchen, rudimentary kitchen, and there was a big stone fireplace to keep things warm on those chilly nights. Mrs. Dempster looked around. "Oh, young sir, you don't want to stay here. Look at that. Look at that paneling. It's got to be full of rats and beetles." Well, they looked closer, and indeed, the paneling was full of holes and scratch marks, but it was beautiful, heavy old oak paneling. And he looked around. There beside the fireplace was a chair, a big, heavy oak chair, quite tall and quite large. It looked more like a throne than a chair, almost. And above that paneling, he saw all these pictures, paintings, high up on the 20-foot tall walls, but he couldn't make out any of the paintings, what they were about, because they were all blackened by age. And there in the corner, there was a hole in the ceiling and a rope that hung down all the way to the floor. "Mrs. Dempster, do you have any idea what that rope is for?" "Oh, yes, young sir, that's your salvation. That goes to a bell up on the roof, and if you pull that when you get into trouble, we'll come running." "Well, I don't expect to get into trouble, Mrs. Dempster." Well, with that, she left some food for him and she swept out. Well, he worked hard that night, studied straight through until about 11 o'clock, when he was startled from his studies by the noise of rats. Rats in the paneling, skittering, squealing, scratching, rats. Oh, all he could think of was Mrs. Dempster saying, "Rats is bogies, bogies is rats." Well, he calmed himself down. He got some tea. He warmed up some of that dinner, and he was able to get back to his studies. He studied until that moment just before dawn, when everything goes quiet And that's what startled him awake from his studies once again, was the silence. The sound of the rats had stopped, and then he heard a squealing, looked over to that chair, that throne of a chair. There was the biggest rat he'd ever seen in his life, its black eyes staring at him with hatred. "Shoo," he said, "get away." But the rat just stared at him. Well, he picked up a book, he threw it. It veered off. The rat just stared at him. He went and got a poker from the fireplace, and he poked it at that rat. The rat, with a squeal, jumped off that chair, ran across the floor, climbed up that rope, and disappeared into the darkness up above. Well, exhausted by this ordeal and by his studies, he went to bed, and he slept. He slept until noon. And then he got up, took a walk in the woods to get away from the place for a while. Well, when he came back, Mrs. Dempster was there tidying up, and he told her about the rat. She said, "Oh, young sir, you need to leave. I fear the devil visited you last night." Mrs. Dempster, it was a very big rat, but it was just a rat. Well, she left him some more food and left. And that night, he studied hard again, but the rats were louder than before. They seemed like they were getting bolder and bolder by step. Well, at 11, he took a meal again, and he took a cup of tea. And later on that night, he was startled once again by the silence. You see, he had begun to get used to the sound of the rats, almost welcome it, because it became like a constant stream outside his window, or the steady pit-pat of rain on the windows. It almost lulled him, and he was able to study. But when it stopped, that was when he was startled out of his studies. There that rat was once again sitting on that chair, that throne, staring at him with black, merciless eyes. Well, he threw a book, and it missed, and another and another. He went through his entire stack of books until he got to the last one, and that book found its mark. It hit that rat. The rat, with a squeal, jumped off, went up the rope, but this time he had been prepared for it. He had turned the lights up, and he could see that rat didn't go all the way to the ceiling. It jumped off about 2/3 of the way up into this big black painting. There was a hole in the bottom of that painting, and the rat went in. "I've got you now," he said. Well, he went to sleep after that, and he woke at noon, and Mrs. Dempster was already there. He didn't tell her what had happened, but he said, "Mrs. Dempster, would you mind cleaning up that painting in the corner behind the rope?" "Oh, certainly, young sir. It's so dark and bleak in here. It would be wonderful to have a little color in the place. I'll clean it up for you." So they got out a ladder for her to get up, and he went out for his walk in the woods. When he came back a couple hours later, she was distraught. She said, "Oh, I've unleashed the devil on you. Please, please, please tell me you will leave immediately." "What are you talking about, Mrs. Dempster?" "The painting. Look at the painting." And he did. He looked. Oh, it was a painting of a judge, a portrait. The judge was wearing judge's robes of ermine and scarlet. And in the painting, he was sitting right in front of the fireplace with the chair. He was in the chair. He said, "Nonsense, Mrs. Dempster. You've just given me something interesting to look at." And with that, she left some food and she swept away. Well, that night, a storm moved in, crash of thunder and lightning, the patter of rain. The house swayed in the intense winds going on outside, but always just underneath that was the sound of the rats, louder and louder. Well, he was able to study till 11, when once again things went silent, and he heard that squeal, and he looked over at the chair. It was not there. The rat was not there. It was up in that painting, looking out through that hole in the painting and squealing at him. Oh. He let it go. He worked his way through it. He went back to his studies. And then, as he took his lunch, his dinner, had his tea and his food, he studied that painting a bit more. Yes, that judge was very severe looking. He had dark, stringy hair. His eyes were black and vindictive. His nose came out like the beak of a bird of prey, was long and pointed. And the mouth was twisted into a hateful, menacing rictus. Oh. He shook it off, went back to his studies, and once again, as that storm abated, the sound of the rats came up and then stopped. He heard the squeal. He looked up, and there was that big rat up there in the hole in the painting, and then he disappeared into the painting, and he looked again. Malcolm looked again at that painting, and there was something wrong. The judge was gone. And there he was in the chair, his eyes menacing, full of hate. When the bell rang at the judge's house, everyone gathered at Mrs. Dempster's place. She had warned them something was afoot that evening. They went out, they went to the house, they had to push that door open, and what they found was Malcolm Malcolmson hanging from that rope, dead. And the painting looked like it had been freshly painted the night before. It was glistening, and the judge looking out with his black eyes, and on his mouth was a malignant grin.